Everybody. It's 11 o'clock, but we're just going to give just a few more minutes for people to get set up. We'll be starting in 2 minutes. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Maureen Sander, and I'm the Senior Regional Resource Director for Caron Treatment Centers. Thank you for joining us for the 13th installment in our webinar series, A View from the Mountain, Caron's perspective on addiction treatment in the wake of COVID-19. This week, we continue our mini-series called Focusing on Family System, how Caron stays connected to families in non-traditional ways. Today's topic focuses on resilient, brave, and courageous, and how to empower children and siblings impacted by addiction with the family. Given the nature of this presentation as more of an open discussion than a didactic lecture, we are not offering continuing education for this presentation. As a reminder, we will be conducting this session in a webinar format, and all participants' microphones will be muted. During the presentation, we encourage you to please utilize the Q&A feature to ask any questions that you may have. And depending on the volume of the questions, we ask that you put down your questions during the Q&A, and by the end of the hour, we will have someone touch base with you. We'll have somebody touch base with you if we don't get to all your questions. The presenter today is Christina Getz, and Christina is with our Student Assistant Program, and she is the coordinator. For the past 8 years, Christina has worked with children impacted by substance abuse in the family through various programs throughout Caron. She has served as a Student Assistant Program liaison to several different schools in Burke County, Pennsylvania. Working directly with elementary school, middle school, and high school students, she's conducted psychoeducational support groups and provided prevention services and assessments. Christina is also a facilitator of Caron's Satele Children and Teens Educational Program, which is open to any child ages 7 to 17 who would benefit from gaining age-appropriate information and education on addiction. The month of June marked our first virtual workshop, which Christina will tell us more about today. Please join me in welcoming Christina.
Thank you so much, Maureen. I'm really excited to be with you today and talk more about this topic that is near and dear to my heart. I've been working with students impacted by addiction over the course of my career at Caron. So this is a topic I could talk about probably all day long, but I will keep it to the hour. I know many of you might be joining us on your lunch break, but I appreciate you taking the time out of your day today to share in this information gathering and get some more information on this topic. So I'm gonna start by sharing a little activity that I normally do with students called an elephant in the living room. So I want all of you to just take a moment, kind of clear your mind, And imagine your living room at home, just kind of an ordinary living room, couch, chairs, all those kind of things that you might have in your living room. Perhaps some of you, due to the pandemic going on, might be working from home. So perhaps you're actually joining us from your living room. So it'll be very easy for you to imagine that you're in your living room. But all those normal things, if it's like my house, I have children, so there's toys in my living room, all sorts of different things going on in there. But I want you to imagine that right there in the middle of that living room, there's a large gray elephant just standing there, kind of swaying side to side. Imagine also that there's people who live in this house with you. Along, there might be a mom, a dad, maybe brothers or sisters, maybe even aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents. And people have to walk through the living room many times a day, and you watch as they walk through it very carefully around the elephant. No one ever says anything about the elephant. They avoid the swinging trunk and just walk around it. Since no one ever talks about the elephant, you know that you're not supposed to talk about it either, and you don't. But sometimes you wonder why nobody is saying anything or why no one is doing anything to move the elephant. After all, it's a very big elephant, and it's very hard to keep walking around it all the time. And people are getting very tired. You wonder if maybe there is something wrong with you, but you just keep wondering, keep walking around it, keep worrying and wishing that there was somebody to talk to about the elephant. Living in a family where drinking or drug use is going on is a lot like living with an elephant in the living room. And so I like to start groups that I've done with students and also our Satele program using this story with students. And I wanted to use it with you today to just kind of get us in that mindset of what it's kind of like to be in that household as those kids are dealing with this topic. So I want to get into the statistics a little bit about COAs. So that's a term that we use for children of addiction, is kind of the terminology that's out there, and share with you just a couple statistics. One of the things you will find is if you research or try to look into this topic, there's a lot of inconsistencies in the numbers that you will find. One of the standards that's out there from NACOA, which is the National Association of Children of Addiction, is that they estimate 1 in 4 children under the age of 18 will be impacted by a parent using alcohol or drugs during their lifetime, before they reach the age of 18. So that's kind of the standard that's been around for as long as I've been doing this. But we know that that number is probably a lot higher because of underreporting. They're also taking into account that maybe it's only a parent, whereas there could be siblings that are impacted by addiction. But still, even if we go with the 1 in 4 kids, imagine like a standard high school that has 9th through 12th grade in it, so 4 different grade levels. When we look at that 1 in 4, that's one whole grade level of kids in a school building that are being impacted by this topic. So it's definitely something that we need to be talking about and be aware of and provide support for these kids. So who is a COA or a child of addiction? These are kids who are impacted by a family member's substance use. It could be it could be the parent, like I said earlier. It could be a sibling. So perhaps they're a younger child. Maybe they have a teenage sibling that could be using. It could be some other caregiver that's in the households, that parent. It could be a grandparent, siblings, other members of the family, other people that are, like family to that child. So it could be someone who, isn't biologically an aunt or an uncle, but kind of takes that place, or a godparent or somebody like that. Really, we look at, in our Satele program, any child who is impacted by someone that they care about or call a loved one, we consider that they are a child of addiction and that they're impacted by it. So let's move on to why do they need our help? For these students, they are at higher risk for emotional and physical, as well as learning problems. They also are at increased risk for depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and suicide attempts. The biggest risk factor that I think is out there is that we know that growing up in a family with addiction, or having someone we care about impacted by addiction, means that we are more at risk ourselves of being, addicted or becoming addicted themselves. So the best thing that we can do by starting to work with students who we know are impacted by this is we can help prevent the future of, you know, them kind of going down the same path as family members. And we know that the next generation that is going to be affected by this disease is right here, right now. And so when we can start working with them as children, we can help prevent some of those things down the line. They're also at risk of witnessing domestic violence and also potentially being re-victimized in the future. So a lot of different reasons why it's important for us to, when we're working with a family member who is dealing with addiction, to also look at addressing everything with the family and also involving the kids, which I know sometimes in my work with families doesn't always come across right away because they think, well, they're really young, they don't really know what's going on, we haven't told them a whole lot. The truth is no matter how young they are, they can tell that something is going on, just like our story in the beginning with the elephant in the living room. They might not know exactly what everything means that's going on, but they certainly can be aware that something is up. There's this elephant in the living room, and I can tell that people are acting differently or things are happening, but I might not totally understand what's going on. So I wanted to highlight too, obviously we are right in the middle of the COVID-19 impact, and also highlight why that also kind of goes along with this topic today. Obviously with the pandemic going on, there's a lot of different impacts. We've got families that have increased isolation. There, depending what state you're in, there might be stay-at-home orders. I know a lot of places, some of those have started to lift, and we've seen that in a lot of areas. Unfortunately, we've also seen a spike in some numbers too. So I have this feeling that we're still going to be in this back and forth where there might be more times with, increased isolation, or back and forth, times where we might have to be staying at home. So obviously, when home is not the greatest place for us to be, or there's a lot of crisis going on at home with someone dealing with addiction, that makes it really tough when we're being told that we have to stay at home and be around that 24/7. For kids, there's that loss of time at school. Most schools close down early. So that's a huge support for students. Not having time with friends or other supports, those sports, after school things, other places where they might have those supports of caring adults that they don't really have access to right at this particular point in time. Also, I know we have offered virtual programming. There's a lot of different places out there offering all sorts of telehealth supports for these students. Unfortunately, though, we have been seeing, in addition to virtual schooling, that there's some lack of access for certain people, and not all families might have the access to be able to get to those telehealth supports. Obviously, in a lot of states, there's closures of bars, more drinking at home, things like that might be going on as well. Also, more time with the family, like I said earlier, might not always be the best thing in these particular situations, so that might be adding more stress. Obviously, just the pandemic in general is creating stress for families and for kids because it's changing, the normal of day-to-day life. And also, we have the added stress of, job loss, financial difficulties, all sorts of different things that are adding to the stress on a family, in addition to potentially already dealing with addiction. So the most important things that I hope I pass along today is for kids impacted by addiction in their families. The things that they really need to understand, first and foremost, is that they are not alone. They are not the only one going through this. And I see this often with kids, even if they have siblings that are in that same household, they have that feeling that, yeah, my sibling's here, but like they're maybe experiencing it different than I am. Maybe I'm seeing the brunt of what's going on in the family. Maybe I have an older sibling who tends to be out all the time and with, friends, and they're not seeing, when mom or dad comes home after drinking, or they're not waiting up worrying about them. So even though they have other people in their family going through it, connecting with other kids and hearing their stories lets them know I'm not alone. There are other people who are going through this, and other people who understand. Secondly, they should not feel ashamed. So making sure that the kids that we're working with know that they're not alone. This isn't their fault. They shouldn't feel ashamed. It's not something that they did or that they caused, and making sure that they're aware of that. And that goes into the third point that I have there, is that it's not their fault. So this is something that is a disease, and helping them to understand it on their level based on their age. and knowing that it wasn't something that they did, it wasn't a bad grade that they got or that argument that they got in with a family member that created this problem, that it was already there, you know, and those things were going on, so that they kind of don't have that guilt and shame that they're carrying around with them. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the consequences for these kids and bring in a little bit about the ACEs study, or the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, and talk about the chronic and toxic levels of stress and the changes to the brain. Like we talked about earlier, we know that there's a higher prevalence of depression and anxiety for kids growing up in families affected by addiction. They're also 3 to 4 times more likely to become addicts themselves as well. So we know with the ACEs study that the more ACEs that a child has, the higher at risk they kind of fall in that pyramid of, you know, early death and risk factors for different health outcomes as well. In the ACEs study, there's about 2/3 of the general population that was surveyed that reported experiencing at least one form of abuse, neglect, or household challenges when growing up. And those include things like domestic violence, substance use in the family, mental illness, divorce, or an incarcerated family member. So the reason I added this in here is to kind of highlight that idea that, you know, 2 out of 3 adults are saying anything, you know, in that topic, that one of those things has occurred for them. So we know that that's a pretty high percentage of our population that's out there, that we even have, you know, adults in our population that have these ACEs because they grew up in a family with addiction going on and perhaps didn't address it. So talking a little bit about how parental addiction and child development kind of intersect. Here we kind of have the stages of psychosocial development. And we know, you know, as a child has to have a firm foundation in each one as they move along in order to move to the next step. And we know that without the proper foundation in one of these stages, conflicts for this kid become increasingly difficult for them to manage and overcome. And when we have substance use going on in the family, that affects the ability for these kids to kind of progress effectively through each of these stages, which obviously can set them up for other issues later in life. So talking about what families are impacted by addiction, or what does a family look like, you know, that is impacted by addiction. And I put this slide here with all of these different pictures of families because it really doesn't discriminate. We could put any family up here, and there's no way by just looking at these pictures that we can say, yeah, that's a family who has addiction, or no, that's not a family who does. We might have some preconceived ideas in our minds, but we don't really have that kind of set, like, yes, I can just walk down the street and I'll be able to tell which is the family that's dealing with this. From the outside perspective, it looks, you know, can be a wide range of socioeconomic backgrounds, intact or divorced families, you know, step families, all different types of families, you know, any religion, race, all those types of things. Addiction doesn't discriminate against any of these. And so therefore, we can see a variety of different families that are impacted by this. On the inside, the perspective looks a little different. So the part that we don't see all the time. So we kind of have this outside perspective of what's going on, depending how functioning things are going in the family. Perhaps from the outside, it looks as though nothing's going on, but on the inside, daily life is usually chaotic, unpredictable. So imagine with the pandemic going on right now for kids, we already have this huge shift of what a normal day looks like. So if your days are already unpredictable, this added stress can be a lot to take on. There's also this unspoken rule in the family that we don't talk. So we don't talk about what's going on. We don't trust. So we're not trusting anybody with this information. And we don't feel, meaning we kind of hold it all in, and we're not sharing that information at all with anybody outside. So there's kind of, you know, nobody comes right out and says this rule, just like nobody comes right out and says, hey, there's a giant elephant sitting in our living room. But kids who are growing up in families dealing with addiction kind of have this unspoken rule that is there, that they kind of know this is something that we don't talk about. Nobody else is really talking about it in the family. And I just know that I have to keep it to myself. Some other things that might be going on there, there might be domestic violence or abuse going on, like we had talked about earlier. Family members might be, feeling shame and guilt about the family situation. There might be higher conflict going on, all sorts of different things. So moving into a couple different, the next few slides have some different costs that kind of come for this family. So there's a relational cost for these kids. Might be loss of friends. So maybe if, certain friends or other parents find out what's going on in the family, they might not want their kids to come over. They might not want, their kids to play with that person. There might be fights within the family, isolation, kind of trying to keep maybe extended family out. Maybe the family members don't want everyone knowing what's going on, or not everybody in our business. Loss of trust, all those different things. For the financial costs to the family, sometimes there can be missed work. And we know right now with the pandemic, people losing jobs, things like that. So that might be adding to the stress. If one family member is losing a job and the other one, is now missing work because of dealing with addiction. Unpaid or late bills, impulsive buying. There might also be bills for medical bills and therapy and other things like that if someone is in treatment and working on getting better. There's also a huge emotional cost for the family. So we know that there can be more anger, more despair, embarrassment, guilt, shame, blame, all those different things going on in this family for this child. So they might be seeing these things going on and then also feeling it themselves. There also might be a lot of self-pity, that kind of, like I talked about before, really important for these kids to know that they're not alone, because they might be kind of feeling like this is just the norm. If I, especially if I'm a fairly young child and I haven't been out, at friends' houses a whole lot and really seen the world from another perspective, this might be what I think is normal. What's going on in my house might seem like this is the standard. This is how it always is. So there could be a lot of that self-pity and not understanding what's going on. There's obviously spiritual costs for the family as well. So some of those, might have a loss of faith, loss of self, disconnection to, if they had some type of church or spiritual community that they were a part of, they might have some disconnection from that. There might also be a changing value system. Again, the isolation comes in there. So they might have, kind of isolated themselves from those connections that they had in their spiritual life. And obviously there's a physical cost as well. So insomnia happens often, stress, health issues, weight gain or weight loss. So a lot of different things that can happen for the person dealing with addiction, but it also affects the family as well. So it could be anyone in the family dealing with those. So there's a lot of different observable behaviors. So coming from an education background, I do a lot of work with school staff, but I included these in here as well, because if we're working with children, these are just some good observable behaviors that might clue us in if we don't know that addiction is going on in the family. Perhaps we're just working, with kids in a variety of different settings, and we might not know that is the specific reason of what's going on with them. So these are just some good behaviors to look for kids that, can kind of be a red flag. Now, as I always say when I'm working with education professionals, just because these are going on does not mean that substance use is going on in that family, but they could be an indicator that it is. So for kids growing up in families dealing with addiction, a lot of high absenteeism. So they might have erratic attendance, frequently absent, frequently tardy, showing up to school late, missing the bus, things like that. They might be sleepy or fall asleep during class, may come across with a neglected physical appearance or look disheveled or kind of not put together. They also sometimes have poor grades or failing or fluctuating performance. So they might be doing really well at particular points in time, and then also, take times where things might be tanking and grades are dropping. So that might send a red flag up for people, in the school field as well. Some other behaviors that you might see in children is, like we talked about earlier, so behavioral and emotional issues. So outbursts, changing moods, fighting, change in eating habits. So that could be, like we talked about, that weight loss and weight gain could be eating more or perhaps loss of appetite, so they're not eating very often, and that's kind of their coping mechanism. From a school perspective, or if you're working with students just in general, like in an after-school program or through therapy or however you're working with students, you might notice like there might be some parental concerns. So parents not returning calls, missing scheduled appointments, to the point where they could come to a meeting or picking up kids under the influence. So kind of any range there. Some other behaviors that we typically see too are at school, frequent trips to the nurse. And usually it's with unexplained kind of things like headaches, backaches, stomach aches. So not tangible, like they're running a fever or things like that, but just kind of like the ways that the stress is coming out. So those headaches, belly aches, things like that. We might see that at school. We might also see that with primary care providers as well, that these might be kids that are showing up with, just kind of chronic pain issues. And that's really the untalked about and the kind of stuff that we stuff in coming out in those ways. These kids might be quiet. They might be the loner, the withdrawn, kind of keep to themselves, to the other extreme of being the kid that acts out in class, wants to be the class clown, wants the attention. And really it's just the various coping mechanisms that kind of come across for these kids. A few other observable behaviors that come up for kids is they might have a sophisticated knowledge of drug use and paraphernalia as well. So sometimes these kids come up as a red flag because like, wow, they have a huge knowledge and we're afraid that perhaps they're using, when actually the truth is that they're not. They have this knowledge because they have a family member who is, so they've seen it firsthand. But that can be a huge red flag to know that they have kind of a really sophisticated knowledge. They might also be anxious when arriving at school or right before going home. Mood changes or behavior changes, kind of that Monday to Friday due to like things that happen on the weekend. I've also seen in kids that I work with, that are dealing with addiction in their families, those changes of seasonality. So when the school year kind of closes, and unfortunately this year we had children who school kind of shut down early for them, but they kind of have this not really looking forward to the summer. These are the kids that like that structure of going to school. It's predictable. They know what to expect while they're there, where their household may be unpredictable and, they have no idea what they're going to walk into when they get home each day from school. So we notice those changes on that week basis, week to week. So Mondays might be hard for them coming back to school, but they're excited about it. And they might be the kids that on Friday aren't really looking forward to the weekend. They'd rather be at school. Same thing, like I said, about going into those summer breaks or long holiday breaks, that you might notice like some apprehension with those kids of what's going to happen, when I have to be home for those 2 weeks. So that's definitely a huge thing right now. With school shutting down early, that we really want to be aware of, that some of these students might be really struggling because they've had even more time at home than just their standard summer time. So next I want to kind of just highlight some different areas of concern based on different age groups. So usually in children, if we look at like ages 6 to 11, this is where they're usually worrying about the health of the parent or the family member who's addicted. They might be upset or angry by the unpredictable behavior and the inconsistent stuff. So people not always showing up when they're supposed to be, promising to take them places, and then that promise doesn't get fulfilled. And they also might be worrying about fights or arguments that they see going on between parents. So again, sometimes when working with families, they're talking about like, oh, they don't really know what's going on. Like we try to keep conversations, after bedtime, things like that. A lot of times the kids are still up, or they might hear things that are going on, even though we think that they don't. So even as young as 6, they have an inkling that something is going on. And then continuing with the 6 to 11 years, there's a few other things that kind of come up as a major area of concern for them. So being scared or upset by violence, if there's violence going on in the family, or the possibility of violence. So maybe there's, arguments that kind of get loud and threatening of, getting police involved or other things like that. Also being disappointed, like we talked about before with if there's broken promises or saying things are going to happen, or I'm not going to use again, I won't drink again, and then coming home again, under the influence. And also, like we talked about before, feeling that this is my fault. Somehow I'm responsible for this. Perhaps it maybe has been said in arguments to them, but sometimes it's just like this unspoken thing that they kind of feel like, I must have done something. Perhaps if I would have cleaned my room, or I wouldn't have gotten into a fight with my brother, maybe this wouldn't have happened. And then moving into the older age group, some areas of concern for like the 12 to 18 years of age. In this age group, they're more concerned about their own substance use. So concerns about that genetic component. Is this something that is going to happen for me because it runs in my family? So they might be more concerned about that area. They also might be concerned about the health of the parent, and how can I try to stop getting them to use? Typically in this age group, we might see the kids who want to pour the bottle of alcohol out or hide cigarettes or do things like that because they're really concerned about how can I help them stop. So that kind of goes back to that first point that I made about, that it's their fault. In some way, they feel like they're responsible for trying to control this or stop this. They're also concerned about their family members' addiction, what impact it's having on the outside life. So their reputation, if they are an athlete, is someone going to show up under the influence at my game? I don't want to be embarrassed. So it might be more about that kind of, becoming a teenager and not wanting to be embarrassed or other people to understand or know what's going on in my family. So now I want to turn to, we know all of these different things that are risk factors, behaviors, and things that we can observe for these kids. But now what can we do? How can we help these kids impacted by addiction? So most importantly, listening. Being a supportive adult who can give focused attention, showing that you care, letting them know that you are willing to, hear what they have to say. Being observant, so being aware of like their facial expressions, body language, kind of those things that maybe aren't being said, but you can kind of tell by how they're acting. Validating these kids, letting them know that you hear them and you understand them. That sometimes it's just the fact that someone's willing to listen to what I have to say, because maybe there's a lot of arguing at home and my thoughts or my opinions aren't valued there. Educating these kids. So one of the things that we do through our Satele program is giving them basic information about alcohol and drug use on their level. So helping them to understand that addiction is a disease, helping them to understand that it's not their fault, giving them just kind of that basic education. So again, with really young kids, we don't have to go into this whole big detail and give them a whole list of all these different things and all the things that could potentially go wrong or happen, but to give them just a general understanding. And one of the things that we try to do is help relate it to other diseases that are out there that they might be more familiar with, and help them understand that it's a disease just like, cancer or asthma or, any other disease that you want to put in there, and helping them to understand the similarities that we might see with anyone dealing with a disease. And then the last one is empower. So helping these kids see that there are safe people in their lives that they can turn to for support and guidance. So whether that's a support person at school, seeing a therapist, at an after-school program, another caring adult that is a family member for them, any of those, just helping them to see who are those safe people that you can go to and that you can be honest with and talk about this topic with. So one of the key things that I always like to share is remembering kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So that's really the key when we're starting to work with kids impacted by addiction, is letting them know that we care and that we're there for them before we try to educate them and give them all this knowledge and all the information that we have. Another key point is to create safety for these kids. So I like this little quote here that says, "In all the chaos, we found safety." So kind of trying to find safety nets and help this family build a safety net for them. So kids that come to our program, I've done groups in schools. So I work with a variety of kids, not always that have a family member that might be in treatment or in recovery. It could be a kid who, has someone in active addiction, and at that particular point in time, there might not be a road that is leading to them getting treatment at that particular point in time. So it's helping them, give them the skills to create safety and good, healthy coping skills and build resilience for them, because they can take care of themselves, even though they can't change the situation that they're in. So going back to the educate piece of, the different ways that we can help, like I talked about, really driving home that you are not alone. Letting, there's power in knowing that other people are going through what you're going through. Using age appropriate language. So figuring out, based on their age group, how do I kind of tackle this? Kind of similar to other conversations that we have with kids is, kind of getting the, like, what do you know, or what are you seeing kind of approach to it, and getting information from them, and then kind of going there. So kind of that, like, if they're asking a question, why are they asking this question? Because sometimes we as adults tend to give them tons of information, and that's really way more than they actually were asking. We kind of read into the question. Also helping them to separate their loved one from the disease of addiction. So that's one of the key things that we work on, is seeing that addiction is this disease, and it's there, and separating that their loved one is still this person that they care about. It's still their family member, and they have this disease. So trying to separate those two things out for them. Teaching them coping skills and the language to ask for help. So teaching them how they reach out and share and do all different things there. So one of the things I have on the next slide is to teach the 7 C's. If you're not familiar with this, this was created by NACOA, which I had referenced earlier as the National Association of Children of Addiction. And I love using this with students, and I think they find it really powerful as well. Later on, I have some resources there, so you can use those to link to some of these slides if you would like to. But the 7 C's you can find on their website. There's a printout that you can create there in the picture. But it starts out, I didn't cause it, I can't cure it, I can't control it. So that first piece is that driving factor that we've been coming from. So we didn't cause this, we can't cure it, and we can't control it as much as we would like to by dumping things out, hiding cigarettes, whatever. We can't do that. But the second part gives the kids hope of however, I can help take care of myself by communicating my feelings, making healthy choices, and celebrating me. So we really focus in our program and in groups that I've run on that second half. So what can we do? How do we take care of ourselves? How do we communicate feelings? Even if we're not a big talker, how can we find ways to share how we're feeling? What healthy choices can we make for ourselves? And the last part, celebrating me, I always look at that as celebrating you, being a kid. What are the things that you enjoy? Making time, if it's building Legos, if it's art, whatever it is, making time for those things that you enjoy doing, because that's how you can celebrate yourself. And then the next slide I have is talking more about teaching self-care. So care for not only our mind, our body, but also our feelings and our spirit. Helping them identify who are safe people. Are there counselors at school? Other helping professionals at school? Perhaps they have school-based therapy or counseling. Who are the people that they can connect with that can be supports for them? Teaching them skills to help problem solve. So if you do work with a student who is in a situation where family members might be in active addiction, kind of some problem solving of if you come home to this, if someone picks you up and is under the influence, what are some different things that you can do, and kind of teaching them some of those skills. Another part of support for them is getting them involved with support groups and different programs. So support groups will help normalize the child's experience, again, that I'm not alone feeling, help them understand what substance use is, help them understand that this is a process, and helping them, kind of understand how addiction is impacting their family member, but also how it's impacting them and their family as a whole. And most importantly, they get to interact with other kids who are going through similar experiences, and they get time to just be a kid. So in all the groups and programs that we run, we build in time for the kids to just be a kid, you know, have fun, laugh, do things to kind of let go. So I want to highlight next a little bit about our Satele program that we have. Our Satele Children's and Teens program is available to students anywhere. We typically hold the program in person at our Pennsylvania campus, but even though we're located in Pennsylvania, we still have had students and kids attend from lots of different areas and out of state as well. So it is open to anyone, anywhere. They do not have to have a family member in treatment at Caron. They just have to have someone in their life that is impacted by addiction and they would like to participate in the program. Like we highlighted in the beginning, in June, we were able to offer our first Satele program virtually, which was exciting because that allows us to interact with kids anywhere, and the ability to travel to Pennsylvania doesn't kind of inhibit that at all. So due to the pandemic, we can't be in person right now. So it's definitely different to be virtual, but we have been able to do that, and we will be offering a virtual Satele program again in August. So typically our Satele program is a one-day program that we hold on a Saturday at our Pennsylvania campus for kids impacted by addiction. They come spend the day with us. We do a lot of different activities. So what we did with our virtual program is we actually meet on a weekly basis for 4 weeks. So we kind of take our day and break it into 4 different components from our day and meet once a week, because obviously no kids are going to want to sit in front of a computer for an entire day and be involved in this program. So we kind of broke it up in a virtual format so that we meet, you know, once a week over the course of 4 weeks. And it gives the kids still that ability to connect and see virtually that there are other families and there are other kids impacted by this. So I want to share with you a couple more, just some different quotes from children of addiction and kind of in their own words. So these are things from kids that I have worked with over the years that kind of, you know, speaks to where they're coming from. So the first one here is, I do not know what treatment means. Where are they? Why am I not involved in the counseling? So this kind of highlights what I had been talking about. A lot of times, kids are not always included in the process, or they're just told that they're kind of away, you know, that, you know, they're getting help or something to the effect, you know, they're not really included. At Caron, we really try to include the family as much as possible. And we have the Satele program for the kids to be involved with as well. But making sure that we include them and educate them, because if we don't, they understand that there's something going on, which means that they will start to fill in the blanks themselves, and perhaps what they're filling in with might be way worse than what we're even talking about. So kind of giving them that information on their level. The next one that I wanted to share a quote from them is, I had to raise myself. So from kind of a teen's perspective, I don't know where to begin to continue my education, schedule homework, make appointments, and find a job. So if you're working with older teenagers who are kind of trying to transition into adulthood themselves, connecting them with positive role models, mentors, things that can help them kind of learn these basic life skills that maybe someone at home isn't able to help them with right now. The next slide has a kind of middle age group, so middle school age. And he was in a group and shared, before I was in this group, I thought I was the only one of this kind of situation. Now I realize that a lot of kids are having the same experience I'm having. So it feels good for these kids to know that, okay, I'm not the only one. Just like, you know, there's support groups for kids going through divorce, different things like that. To know that there's other families going through what I'm going through can be really helpful and provide support. In addition, participating in some type of support group or program like our Satele program gives them connection to supportive adults as well and mentors for them. And then a couple more that I want to share. So some from younger kids is, I didn't get to spend time with my loved one. They were always at meetings. They're away for a long time from home, and they feel like I don't matter to them, things like that. So we hear this a lot from younger kids that might not totally understand. So kind of sitting them down and letting them know what to expect when their loved one comes home from treatment. So giving them that information, explain what AA meetings are, that this is part of them getting better and working towards recovery, so that they kind of understand that they're not just being away from you for just whatever, that there's a purpose, and this is kind of just like them going, taking medication if they have some other disease or going to treatments. This is the same type of thing. These are the things that help them sustain their recovery. And then the last one that I have there is that this child says, I cannot trust anyone. People always say things are going to change, but they never do. Why would things change now that my mom has been to treatment? So from the perspective of a kid, who has someone in treatment, unfortunately, there's been those broken promises along the way. So really helping these kids get involved in seeing the change process, seeing why these steps are important, and help them work on rebuilding that trust and those healthy coping skills so that they can work on that relationship with that family member. And the next slide is just a quote that I wanted to share as well. Every kid is one caring adult away from being a success story. So hopefully you can be that caring adult or that support for that kid, and getting them connected to programs like ours or other supports in their area. The last thing I wanted to share, as I know we're getting close to the end of our hour here, is I just wanted to share a few resources that might be helpful. If you're working with families, some things that they can use. If you yourself are working with kids, some different tools that you might be able to utilize as well. So the story that I shared in the beginning, The Elephant in the Living Room, there is a book that has that story that I read, as well as it's set up kind of like a workbook. So there's some different activities and information in there. So that's a great book that you can access as well. The next slide that I have is a really great book that I love. Unfortunately, just recently it's out of print. However, you might still be able to find it, in some like thrift things. So if you happen to come across a copy of this, I highly recommend picking it up. It's called Think of Wind. And it's really great for elementary age kids to help them understand that, just like you can't see the wind, you can see what it does. So you can see how it moves trees, how, in powerful storms, how it can knock things down, and relating that to addiction, that while we can't always see it, we might see how addiction acts in our loved one and things like that. The next resource is if you're working with older kids, so teenage, high school age, Understanding the Fall is actually written from the perspective of this woman, Susan McMartin, and kind of her journey through, the teen years and then kind of moving out onto her own and dealing with her mom's addiction. So it's a really great perspective for high school age kids. One of the other resources that I wanted to share is through NACOA, the National Association of Children of Addiction. They worked with Sesame Street just last year. So this just came out in the fall. And through Sesame Street and Communities, they have a huge amount of resources on their website, which is specifically targeted towards these younger age groups, if you think about the age group that would be watching Sesame Street. And they introduced a Muppet that is named Carly, who is dealing with a mom who is in recovery and going to meetings and helping her Muppet friends understand on her level what's going on in her family. And on the next slide, you'll see a picture of Carly, and she's also with Celia, which is her human counterpart. So a family that Sesame Street worked with, that Celia has addiction in her family, I believe with both of her mom and her dad. So they kind of based their information and, their stories that they're including into the Sesame outlook and platform based on Celia's story. So I'm super excited about this because I have always been a proponent of talking to kids as early and as often as possible. So I feel like Sesame Street is a great tool if you have young kids at home to really be able to incorporate this topic in something that they already know and are familiar with. On the next slide, I have just a few resources I want to highlight from NACOA. Their website is a wealth of information. There's tons of great things. They have a kit for kids, a kit for parents, They even have a kit for educators. So if you work with school professionals to kind of help give them some education on this, but there's a great thing that's pictured there, the 12 steps for kids. So this can be really helpful for kids if they have a parent that's working their own 12 steps, that they can kind of have their own version for them. So a lot of great resources there. One other thing that I wanted to highlight here in my resources is through our student assistance program, we have created a digital learning platform. It just released actually last fall. So we have a variety of courses on there, but we have one course in particular that is on this topic of substance use impact on the family and kids. And so you can find a ton more information over top of what I could give you here by accessing that. And in the slides, there is the information, and you can find that on our website as well. We have a variety of different courses that are on there. We also have one that's geared for teens that is a web-based digital platform for them to work on reducing or quitting their use of nicotine products. So that's another great resource if you're working with teenagers that might be struggling with some of their own use. There's some great things there. And the last slide I have there is just a list of some of those different resources that I referenced that you can see there with NACOA and Sesame Street in communities, lots of different things. If you're not familiar with Sesame Street in communities, they have a lot of information on a variety of topics. So including, families dealing with addiction. So thank you so much for having me today. I really enjoyed sharing my passion for working with kids impacted by addiction. And I think we will leave it to if there's questions.
Thank you, Christina. We'll now answer some of the questions our attendees have submitted throughout the registration process. So the first question, Christina, is what is the best way to start a conversation with children about addiction, and what age do you think is appropriate?
All right, well, this one, like I said, I highlighted a little bit throughout the presentation, but really, as young as toddler age, when they can start to understand, obviously we're not going to be able to sit down and give them all the details of what addiction is and how it's a brain disease and load them with all of this scientific information that we have, but we can start to help them understand what's going on. So even with my own children, I've had conversations about what drugs and alcohol are. Alcohol is an adult beverage from little on up. Even when giving medication, I look at trying to find teachable moments. So when my kids, have allergy medication that they have to take, or if they're sick, if there's medication coming from the doctor, explaining to them that these things can help us and are safe to take if we use them appropriately. So kind of building those skills from little on up to understand that, there's medications out there that we can take, but if we don't take it correctly, it can cause problems for us. So helping them build that foundation of understanding that as they get older, they can then, filter in, if alcohol or other drugs are used, that, these things might happen. Also helps when we're talking about opioid epidemic and prescription pain medication use, and obviously explaining to kids that, yes, they got this from a doctor and it was safe for them to use, but when we don't use it appropriately, that's where the problems can set in and where we might develop addiction. So I think starting from, toddler on up and meeting them at their level. So like I had said before, trying to understand what questions they have and addressing that something is going on in the family. Trying to sweep it under the rug or keep it in and thinking like, oh, they have no idea. They're so young. They don't know what's going on. They can tell something's up. So being honest with them and having that conversation is really helpful.
Thank you. And you're right. When they sweep it under the rug, the kids are going to hear it from somebody else. So it's best that they hear it from the parent to get the facts straight. Well, thank you for that. Great. And our second question is, how can we, and you touched a wee bit on this also, how can we focus on resilience and not pathology?
Right. So that's a key component of our Satele program is, yes, we're going to explain addiction and help them understand that it's a brain disease, but really focusing on that second half of those 7 C's. So what are those things? Teaching them, self-care skills, teaching them how to talk about feelings and be willing to open up, finding people who are safe, that they can trust, whether it's family members, people at school, whoever that is for them, that can be that safe person to kind of talk through things with, and teaching them those coping skills, or even giving them opportunities to try things out. So maybe they're not big into art or things like that, but finding, let's try it out and see, does it help? And I encourage kids when I work with them to kind of make a list of all those things that they like to do that help them feel better. So maybe it's going out and swinging on the swing, whatever it is, make a list. So when you have one of those days where you're really struggling, you can go to that list and be like, okay, I'm just going to pick something off of here and I'm going to go do it for 10 or 15 minutes to kind of help me feel better.
Nice. Thank you. Another question we have is, what are some ways we can build confidence in children affected by substance abuse disorder?
I think kind of some of the things that I touched on already is really helping them have that knowledge, giving them, that knowledge gives them the words and the tools and the skills to kind of talk through and understand what's going on for their level, and just encouraging them that it's okay to talk about things, that keeping it all in is kind of like, having a balloon that we keep putting air in and not letting any out. Eventually we're going to lose it and explode if we don't share those things. So kind of modeling healthy coping skills for them. So if there's other members of the family who can model that for them, if you're working with them in therapy, helping them build those skills, but also, as a family member modeling for them, yes, you know what, we're having a tough day. Let's take a break and let's make time for something that helps us feel better.
Thank you. And you did touch on this a wee bit too. What have you learned to make virtual sessions more engaging for this age group? You were talking
that's definitely a challenge. It's not the same as being in person in a room where we can do physical activities and be moving and doing lots of different things to, engage kids. But I have found different ways to adapt our activities to make them work in a virtual platform, giving kids a chance to talk and share. So leaving that open time. I've also found there's one website you can go to. It's called Wheel of Names. So you can make a wheel and you can put any words on there that you want. So if you have games that you typically use with students, it's a way for them to, to kind of make it interactive, that the wheel spins and then you land on whatever, question or whatever you put in there. So it's a way to kind of make it interactive in a virtual platform as well. So there's some different tricks and things out there that we can do to try to help engage kids through a screen, since we can't be with them in person right now.
Great. In what age are you seeing more kids being able to adapt to that on the screen?
Our last group that we ran virtually, we had most of our kids were ages 9 to 14. Our program is open ages 7 to 17. It just so happens that's the pocket of kids that we had sign up. Typically what we do is, if we have a bunch of younger kids, we keep them all together in one group and then separate out the older kids together. So trying to pocket them into, kind of a younger age group and an older age group so that we can make it interactive on their level.
Great, thank you. Another question we have is, how do you keep a sibling from spiraling out of control?
That's a great question. So we've had a lot of kids come through our program that might have a sibling in treatment, or maybe a sibling who, is currently using. But we talk a lot about problem solving skills, and also that, even though that unwritten rule in the family is, don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, that it's okay to share things about your sibling for their safety. So kind of encouraging kids that, if your sibling says like, hey, don't tell mom and dad that I was out with so-and-so, or I didn't come in till 2 a.m., or you could tell I was under the influence when I came in, that they should share that for safety reasons. We also talk about that with, kids who might have a parent in treatment or in recovery, that, if you see them drinking again, let somebody know that's a trusted person so that you can get them connected back to treatment or back to supports that they need to get them back on the path to recovery.
Thank you. And we do have one more question before I announce what our topic is next week. It is, how do I find resources in my area relating to SAP services?
Well, our student assistance program, we have staff up and down the East Coast. So we have people in lots of different areas and different programming and things that we offer. So you can find all of that on our website and contact us for more information if you're interested in any of our programming. And I know, Maureen, I think you had a few things that you could add to that one as well.
Yes, and we have regional resource directors throughout the United States that can support families also, not just with siblings, but with older, all ages. If you need any assistance with family members or, folks that you're working with, please reach out to your regional resource director. All right. Thank you so much, Christina. I'm not going to reiterate what she talked about with Satele Family Program. So please contact Christina about that. And also, we are excited about next week. Please join us on Tuesday for Focusing on Family Systems, a mini-series, as we welcome Mike Otay, Family Program Coordinator, who will be discussing the topic on shame reduction, boundaries, and tough conversations, how parenthood changes when a child is addicted. So please watch out for your emails coming through and sign up for that. And also please take a look at the next form there, and it talks about our, as I just said, our local regional resource directors. We have great folks that have great resources. We're there to help you at any time. So please take a look at that. And I hope all of you have a safe and happy 4th of July. Thanks for joining us today.